The first season of Angel, the beloved spin-off of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, follows its titular character's early efforts to earn redemption. Angel, a vampire with a soul who had spent centuries doing evil as Angelus, seeks to atone for his past actions and find a new personal identity, and throughout the show's 5 seasons, its characters and story arcs explore the various facets of this central conflict. One of the important additions is Charles Gunn, who is the focus of our analysis today. This character stands at a crossroads where the show's greatest ambitions collide with some unfortunate shortcomings, where its layered philosophical dilemmas lead to outcomes that could be considered underwhelming, even regrettable, yet remain deeply compelling to talk about. So today, I'm just going to take a quick little look-see at his journey and examine who he is, what he brings to the show's storylines, and why he matters. Actually, before we continue, I just thought of a really good idea for this project. Ready for this? You ready for this? Since this is my second video essay analyzing Angel, thereby making this a series, and one I'd like to continue doing from time to time, and since you could say I'm investigating a character from the show, then in a nod to the title character's own fictional detective agency, I'm going to title this video series, The Angel Investigations. The audience first meets Gunn in the episode Warzone, and the episode is quick to draw the lines that divide him from Angel. The episode opens on a familiar scene for Season 1. A woman is being hunted by demons in a bad part of town when the demon's attention is suddenly drawn to a man dressed in all black who has come to save the day. The setup and visual cues prime the audience to expect Angel to appear, as he had in several similar cold opens throughout Season 1, before the camera pans up to reveal Gunn instead.
You expecting somebody else?
The music also draws explicit attention to this contrast, a fact that was described in the essay Ubi Caritas, Music as a Narrative Agent in Angel, penned by Matthew Mills. The melody that the horns play in this scene is Angel's heroic leitmotif, which is first introduced in the pilot and then given a harmonically satisfying arrangement in that episode's final scene. This ties Angel's heroism to his commitment to connecting with people and saving souls. After that, it's used frequently throughout Season 1 to accompany Angel's redemptive actions, and the first few notes of that melody are played here as well. Within a single pan-up shot and half of a familiar leitmotif, Gunn has provided the surface-level aesthetic and aural signifiers of the heroic Angel, before that dissonant chord tells us that his character is going to pose a sharp contrast to Angel's identity. Over the remainder of the episode, we see the scope of that contrast. Gunn is established as the leader of his own gang of demon hunters, and their ideology and methodology are presented as a sharp contrast to Angel's. Angel had first started on the path of helping people out of a sense of atonement over his past evils, and his supposed destiny is a source of both internal and external conflict throughout all 5 seasons. Gunn, by contrast, is fighting vampires as a personal choice, and he has no interest in a larger picture. Following his introductory fight with the demons, we learn that this attitude is already a point of friction between himself and the group, particularly with his younger sister Alana.
We're dying here, Gunn.
Everybody dies. Just trying to make sure that when we die, we stay dead.
Gunn has no expectations of a long life for any of them, and during his next encounter with vampires, his recklessness leads to Alana being abducted by the group and turned into one of them. Meeting Gunn causes part of Angel's buried guilt to resurface, a feeling that's compounded when Gunn rejects Angel's offer of aid because of Angel's own status as a vampire.
Why can't we do this together?
You figure it out.
His actions are aesthetically and superficially in line with Angel, who is on the surface the paragon of what the show considers heroic, at least at this point in the series. But his own perspective on his operations and his personal motivations set him apart from Angel throughout the episode. Angel later earns Gunn's reluctant appreciation when he saves Gunn and the gang from the vampires, and leaves Gunn at the end of the episode with the admittance of hoping Gunn will now continue to help him in the future. After seeing firsthand what the kind of evil he used to inflict has done to Gunn, and how Gunn has vowed to keep the guilt of his own failings with him, he decides to extend to Gunn the offer of future partnership.
I don't need no help.
I might.
Gunn sees remarkable growth throughout Season 2 as he begins spending more time with Angel and his companions Cordelia and Wesley. While his moment-to-moment recklessness fades during his time in their company, his disinterest in long-term planning does place him at odds with them during their confrontations with Darla. As Angel becomes increasingly obsessed in learning the cause and reasons for her presence, he withdraws from the cautionary guidance of Wesley and Cordy, while Gunn, the man of action, is all too eager to aid him. But despite encouraging Angel at first, Gunn still draws his limits and takes the side of Cordelia and Wes when Angel goes too far and chooses not to intervene when Darla kills a group of humans. After Angel fires the three of them, they choose to continue their work as helpers of the helpless without Angel, and Gunn finds value in working alongside them. When Wesley suffers a gunshot wound to save Gunn's life during one particularly dangerous confrontation, their bond is solidified for the street-hardened Gunn as brothers in arms. However, it's during this period with Cordy and Wes where Gunn's priorities begin to be called into question. After Angel apologizes and rejoins their team, Gunn reluctantly accepts the vampire's new role, but members of his old gang appear in the episode Belonging to call on Gunn for a case they're working on. His friends don't need his expertise or involvement, they specifically need to borrow his tricked-out truck. This interaction, and the later demise of a member of his old group at the hands of a demon, adds even more guilt to Gunn's already loaded conscience about where his loyalties should lie.
You should have waited for me. We've been waiting on you for months, bro.
But he ends the season with them resting with Team Angel, even with fresh reminders of Angel's nature as a vampire and Wesley's unsettling ruthlessness as the new leader. The issue of Gunn's lingering involvement with his old gang doesn't reach its endpoint until the Season 3 episode, That Old Gang of Mine. In Gunn's absence, the group has fallen under the leadership of Geo, a man with even less tolerance for anything supernatural than Gunn had back in Season 1. The members of the gang have been consumed by their prejudice and anger, and their new indiscriminate willingness to target anyone and anything demon-related brings the pressure of Gunn's torn allegiances to a boiling point. Once the gang sets their focus and weapons on Angel, Gunn fully severs ties with them and chooses Team Angel for good. He chooses the goodness and genuine heroism he's come to see in the vampire over the continued guilt and vengeance of his old group and their lifestyle. While the presentation of this conflict in the episode is messy and at times even possibly insensitive in the analogies it draws between supernatural conflicts and real-world racial tensions, the growth it shows for Gunn's character is still meaningful.
And you're gonna choose that over me?
Looks like. It's about the mission, bro. He's got it, and you don't.
As the show changes in focus and aesthetic style over seasons 3 and 4, Gunn's place and character change direction as well. Aside from the beginning of his relationship with Fred, a new addition to the cast in Season 3, his personal development does take a step backward in focus for the major story arcs of that season. This does reveal a major strength of Angel's storytelling style, though. Throughout its duration, the show maintains a remarkable grace in moving its focus around the tapestry of its characters and plotlines. However, some elements of where the story takes Gunn do have troubling culminations. There is a voice in the writing of fiction, and that voice helps the audience infer what they think the story is saying. That voice can be heard through what kind of storylines the characters are involved in, how the characters are positioned in relation to one another, what the consequences are of those stories, how those consequences carry through, and who the framing skews toward. And how the voice of Angel feels about Gunn in Season 4, it changes. This change first really comes to light in the episode Supersymmetry, in which the effects of Gunn's own personal insecurities come back into sharp focus. In this episode, Fred gets an opportunity to present a lecture at a physics symposium hosted by her former professor. Woohoo! Women in STEM! The episode's main emotional conflict comes when Fred realizes that her professor had actually been the one who sent her to Pylea. She's angered upon learning this and seeks to kill him in retaliation, but Gunn pleads with her to reconsider.
We help people. Fred, if you do this, the demons you'll be living with won't be the horned, fangy kind. They'll be the kind you can't get rid of.
What Gunn tells her is in keeping with the series' ethos. One of the core principles of Angel is that killing a human has a debilitating effect on one's own mind and soul. However, the framing of how dire that effect is given so much more weight in this episode than it is when Angel tries to kill Wesley in the episode Forgiving, or when Wesley kills a man in the episode Shells.
Were you even listening?
This imbalance in framing honestly makes it rather ironic when both Angel and Gunn talk down to Fred about taking the higher path. The fourth season builds toward a climactic philosophical battle in which Team Angel defends the right that people have to make their own choices and face the consequences of those choices, whether those consequences are desirable or not. Yet here, when the time comes for the two characters who are the most vocal about this importance of free will to support one of their allies of making her own choice to seek her own closure in her own life, that ethical voice is nowhere to be heard. Instead, Gunn takes the choice away from her by killing the professor at the last second, prioritizing his self-imposed duty to preserve her clean conscience. While the immediate crisis is solved, this is the point where their relationship begins to deteriorate. Over the following episodes, Fred begins to withdraw from Gunn, inadvertently compounding his insecurities over his sense of self and his role in the group. Ironically, the action he takes to try to help save Fred's soul and keep her connected to the group's mission only pushes the two of them apart and drives the group further from their mission of helping people. Professor and scholar Michaela D.E. Meyer penned the essay From Rogue in the Hood to Suave in a Suit, Black Masculinity and the Transformation of Charles Gunn, in which she dissects the troubling larger implications of Gunn's place in Season 4 as follows. Killing the professor repositions Gunn as violent, and this association with violence continues throughout the fourth season. The narrative frequently emphasizes Gunn's physical strength over his emotional or intellectual abilities. In Players, Gunn even claims,
Hey, I'm just a muscle.
while a minor character, Gwen, commenting on how Gunn's white counterparts at Angel Investigations consistently use him for fighting and recon, but do not include him on research or strategy, observes,
Man, they have done a number on you. You really believe this I'm the muscle crap?
This link continues when Gunn is chosen by the big cat at Wolfram and Hart in Home. Myers' observations touch on a recurring phrase that defines Gunn throughout this season, his role as the muscle. This framing of Gunn's value to the group only being brute strength is present to set up a crisis of identity that reaches a climax at the end of Season 4. The manner in which the characters around Gunn, as well as Gunn himself, speak of his role as the muscle imply that this has always been his role. However, I would argue instead that this role is only noticeable in Season 4 because of the way the season's narrative arcs are structured. Several of the instances where Gunn is referred to as the muscle come from Angelus, as well as Gunn himself during specifically his lowest points. Even in Season 4, he does some of the best thinking on the team's cases, such as figuring out how their pages of clues form a larger map in Apocalypse Now-ish, and offering up what could be considered the philosophical thesis of the season in Inside Out.
The final score can't be rigged. I don't care how many players you grease, that last shot always comes up a question mark. But here's the thing. You never know when you're taking it. It could be when you're duking it out with the Legion of Doom or just crossing the street deciding where to have brunch. So you just treat it all like it was up to you. Because you never know when it is.
It's worth ruminating on the timing of when he offers up this philosophical morsel. In the scene where he says this, Gunn and the group have just been informed by one of their enemies that all of the major events of the past several years of their lives were all supposedly part of a cosmic-level plan by the season's antagonist to orchestrate her own arrival on Earth. All of the characters are worried about their supposed lack of agency, and that's when Gunn makes this statement, expressing his steadfast faith in the value of people's actions. Thus, the experience of watching Gunn throughout Angel Season 4 is rendered as such. Hearing Gunn and multiple people around him claim that his only value to the team is brute strength, while the words and actions he offers suggest the opposite. Unfortunately for Gunn as a character, this incongruity of perception isn't ever directly addressed within the text. The conflict between how the team views Gunn, how Gunn views himself, how Gwen tells him he should view himself, and critically, who Gunn actually is, none of that is actually here so that it can be resolved. At least, not now. It's not there so that Gunn can understand for himself that he's a better man than others may think he is, nor so that the other characters can reconcile how their views of Gunn were misguided. In fact, the exact opposite happens. By the Season 4 finale, Gunn's insecurity over his ostensible incongruity with the intellectual qualifications of his peers has mutated into such a deep desire for an easy fix that Wolfram and Hart, the epicenter of the world's evil, need only prey upon it to convince him to sign his life away. At the beginning of Season 5, Gunn receives a major neurological transformation via a brain implant that endows him with a comprehensive knowledge of the legal system. This transformation, coupled with Gunn's enthusiastic embrace of their deal with Wolfram and Hart, redefines his role in the group. His legal knowledge proves to be an important tool in the supposed crusade against evil, and Gunn views his aesthetic and neurological makeover as a transcendence of that aforementioned muscle status. However, as in keeping with Angel, where unappetizing truths and poetic irony lay under many of the major story developments, there is a harsh irony in this transformation, one that is worded very well in the following paragraph. Gunn, as super lawyer, remains the muscle of the gang, despite his desire to be more. In the new world of the corporate firm, muscle equates legal expertise, not brawn. Gunn continues to fight off the major villains, while Angel defeats the more imposing threats, sometimes adopting explicitly legal strategies himself. Wes and Fred continue to operate in the worlds of arcane knowledge, and to fit more accurately the traditional role of the lawyer hero. That was written by Sharon Sutherland and Sarah Swan in their essay, The Rule of Prophecy, Source of Law in the City of Angel, featured in the book Reading Angel, and it greatly influences my understanding of Gunn's arc in this season. In nearly every one of the first 12 episodes of Season 5, at one point or another, Gunn defends the group's decision to take over the company, becoming increasingly defensive of his own perceived greater value to the group, even as the group's work shades off into the morally murky.
End of the day, I'm thinking we made the right choice.
You really think they won't let us out? Or is it that you just don't want to leave?
Okay, maybe I don't. It's because I believe in what we're doing. We made the right call.
This reading of Gunn's role in Wolfram and Hart brings us to the turning point for his character in the fantastic episode Smile Time. The group is investigating a children's television puppet show that's connected to several members of its target audience landing in the hospital, and figure out that the puppets on the show are actually controlling the show's producers and using the program as a conduit to feed on children's energy. Entering the Smile Time producer's office presents us with a grotesque reflection of the Wolfram and Hart workplace, with small, harshly lit corridors populated by underpaid stooges obeying the whims of the world's villains. Here, the humans no longer even have their own agency to reluctantly ignore in service of the company. Their agency starts and stops completely at the whims of those who are really in charge. Gunn is brought into this conflict at the point when his allegiance to Wolfram and Hart has reached an apex, and it is at that apex when the legal knowledge he'd been endowed with begins fading from his mind. And as Gunn fears losing his value in the midst of navigating this distorted miniature company of puppets, he decides to make a bargain with his doctor to make the upgrade permanent.
The show is possessed. Smile Time's ratings hit an all-time low last year. Frampkin made a deal with some devils to bring them back to #1. Pretty tricky legalese, too. Frampkin must have missed some of the fine print.
Which allowed them to take over everything.
We're in the hearts and minds of every single living being.
Including Frampkin. These particular devils have a fairly distinctive MO.
They've done this before?
Our firm has always been here, in one form or another.
This episode's comedic tone intentionally downplays the gravity of Gunn's decision, but the consequences take center stage in the following episode. As it turns out, the customs release form he signed becomes the instrument of Fred's death, infecting her with the spirit of the ancient demigod Illyria. During the group's efforts to save her, Gunn returns to the White Room for answers, only for the conduit to take the form of Gunn himself, forcing Gunn to proverbially look himself in the mirror and prelude the pain he'll inflict upon himself after she's gone. Gunn is made to realize how he's lost his sense of self and how that loss has informed the actions he took, but it is in the episode Underneath where Angel, the man Gunn had once turned away 4 years earlier, visits him to advise that he seek out the atonement he desires. Team Angel locates Lindsay, a former lawyer for Wolfram & Hart that is trapped in a holding dimension as punishment for defiance of the senior partners, hoping to probe him for information on the partners' plans. Lindsay's daily punishment in this dimension is having his heart cut out of his body on a daily basis, only for his body to then be mystically healed and his memory of the torture erased. As a solution to the logistical necessity of keeping someone as prisoner in this dimension upon Lindsay's escape, and as personal punishment for his responsibility in Fred's death, Gunn volunteers to take Lindsay's place.
Think about atonement.
On the surface, it can appear challenging to arrive at a satisfying answer on how Gunn's courtship with his own mortality in seasons 1 and 2 could inform his torment at this point in his journey. It did seem to me that this aspect of his character had been placed on the back burner during the larger arcs of seasons 3 and 4. However, the nature of the punishment he receives brings his desire to atone for his part in Fred's death into harmony with his supposed death wish, and those two factors serve to facilitate his rediscovery of his own identity. He suffers death on a daily basis, and it's specifically through the hollowing out of both his body and mind, as a divine punishment for defying the wishes of the forces of evil. Stacey Abbott, the editor of the aforementioned Reading Angel, writes of this in her TV Milestones installment of the show as follows. While the first violation of Gunn, achieved through modern technology, served to compromise Gunn's identity, this experience, harking back to medieval torture, facilitates Gunn's gradual recuperation of the self, as he is reminded, through the painful and deadly penetration of his body, of his humanity. Now rid of his interest in compromising with evil, and accepting of his own moral failings, Gunn is free to return to Wolfram & Hart by the efficient intervention of Illyria. And he ends the series getting to experience both sides of the hybrid nature of his full identity. In the series finale, and the final episode of the Buffyverse on television, Gunn spends his possible last day alive returning to his communal roots to help Anna at her shelter, and in his battle, he gets to slay a group of the corrupt bureaucrats that he'd used to bargain with. The show concludes with the characters thematically transcending the lines between person and demon, and right and wrong. Gunn is a character whose personal failings revolve around how his patterns of self-sabotaging and his pessimistic outlook on his own future and life are mixed in with his prejudices against the supernatural, causing him continual personal insecurity over his place in the life he cares about living. And this is a through line that is present through his torn loyalties between Team Angel and his old gang, through his status as the supposed muscle in Season 4 and his desire for greater value as a member of the team, and through his desire to keep his newfound value when he's made the brains of the operation in Season 5. But he is able to conclude the series fully self-actualizing his own worth through what he values in the world and in the continual fight for good. His worth, and indeed the worth of all the characters, doesn't come from titles, prophecies, status, or supernatural gifts. It comes from the commitment to acting on one's own good values, regardless of where you come from.